Welcome, everybody, to the first panel of MICE 2017. This is the panel on comics and medicine. I'm John Bell. I'm the moderator, but the people you're really here to hear from are our panelists, and I'll introduce them now. To my immediate left is Kathy Leamy, a medical writer and cartoonist with an interest in preventive medicine and primary care. Her mini-comics include Mindful Drinking, Green Blood, an introduction to eco-friendly feminine hygiene, and Diabetes is After Your Dick. And she created the Susie and Ray webcomics for the Massachusetts General Hospital. Kathy has a master's degree in health communications from Tufts and is based here in the Boston area. To her left is Yasmin Omar Atta, an intersectional comics artist, illustrator, and game designer. Yasmin's debut novel, Mishadra, there's a parentheses around an H in the middle there, was just published by Simon & Schuster, and it's about an Arab-American college student struggling to live with epilepsy. They focus on creating art centered around the themes of coping with illness, understanding identity, and dismantling oppressive structures. Next to Yasmin is Kyoto Wilberg, the first ever artist in residence at the New York Academy of Medicine Library. She is a massage therapist and a health science educator. Her comics focus on bodies, both human and animal, anatomy, bioscience, women's health, and history. Her collected self-care comics for artists will be published by Uncivilized Books next spring under the title Draw Stronger. And at the far end, Matthew No is a library fellow at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, the Lamar Suter Library, and the graphic medicine specialist for the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, the New England region. She is the curator for the weekly blog posts This Week in Graphic Medicine, which serve as a newsletter and bibliography for comics and medicine news. Now I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, talking about how they first put comics and medicine together. What was their first project, and how did that feel? Did it feel revolutionary? Did it feel like a breakthrough? Did it feel like you didn't have good models for what you were doing? Or did you feel like you were actually doing something important? And Kathy, why don't you start, please? And we'll go along the panel.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I've been drawing cartoons my entire life, essentially, and it's one of the main ways that I communicate with people. And about 12 years ago, I needed to get a new job when I was a web developer, and I started working at Mass General Hospital. And I just got so immersed in medical stuff. It was just chock full in my brain all the time. And how do I communicate things to people? I put them in comics. So I started making little comics about what I was absorbing and learning at work. And since I worked for a primary care practice, it was mostly about preventive medicine, about when to get your tetanus shot, when do you get a colonoscopy, when do you get a mammogram, all that kind of wellness stuff. And, yeah, I guess at that time, there really wasn't that much out there that I saw for comics and medicine. Like, I knew it could be a thing, but it felt just kind of solo, just doing it myself. And then I went to the Comics and Medicine Conference in, I think, 2012, and that's when I saw there's a whole bunch of people doing it, and this could be a much bigger thing than I realized.
Thank you.
All right, so for me, Mishadra actually is my graphic novel debut, and it is very heavily based on my own experiences as an epileptic. About 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I have both convulsive and non-convulsive seizures, and processing it initially was a lot. It was really difficult because I didn't feel like I could really talk to people. I felt like people couldn't understand. I felt like there really wasn't fiction that I could really immerse myself in or like relate to. I just wasn't seeing my story around. So I started doing this comic as a webcomic just for myself, just to help myself kind of work through and like put my thoughts out there. And it started to grow. I didn't think that anyone was going to be interested in a story about epilepsy and like in my problems and my processing of my illness, but people were interested. And that's kind of how it brought itself into this collection today of all of my stories strung along in a narrative through an avatar. And me processing my illness and me putting my experience into graphic form is what made me functional and made me start to like process and start to accept my illness to the point where like, now I can function and now I can talk about it and now I can like really accept it as a part of myself. So for me, graphic medicine is everything. graphic medicine is the only way that I have been able to survive to this point and be able to process everything and make art about it and speak about it.
Great. Creative?
So for a number of years, I was teaching at a health science college, and I teach fun required classes like pathology and anatomy or whatever. And the classes are 4 hours long, and my class would go from 6 to 10 every night. And my students would get very bored, and I would make jokes about disease, which I thought were funny, and some of them thought were funny. But I would find myself coming up with these gag cartoons that were very, very complicated. Like an eyelash mite is is having a baby shower, and a pubic louse gives her diapers. And this is a problem because eyelash mites don't have ani, right? So it's very funny, but if you don't know that, then it's not funny. So I would explain these things to my husband and like chase him around the house, and because I was like, I have an idea for a cartoon. And so he was like, well, you really need to write up this process. So I started doing these performative pieces. So my first experiences with graphic medicine were doing performative pieces where I would make a gag cartoon looking very conservative, like in the style of the New Yorker. And then I would gunk it up, where I would end up having arrows and definitions and all this other kind of stuff. And I would create these explanations so that by the end of the process, people could also be laughing because eyelash mites don't have ani. It was like a cultural faux pas. But then from there, I kind of kept going. Occasionally I do narratives about working in healthcare, but usually my work is more like commentary or taking information and applying it to my own world. So there's a page, the Wandering Uterus page up there is from a mini comic I made where I have a migraine in the comic, and I'm thinking about using ancient wisdom to help me, because also being in massage, there's a lot of alternative health care. Anyway, so the wandering uterus, the idea that your uterus could literally wander around your body was like the thing that everybody relied on for women's medicine for thousands of years, literally. So anyway, I try to use the methods of the wandering uterus to cure my migraine. And so I kind of live a lot of what I do, but I don't, although I am a patient, I don't use it to process my own stories usually. That may change, but for right now, it's more about concepts things that I think should be communicated to patients and myself, or things that I just think are really funny. So I'm really interested in graphic medicine for a way of normalizing the body and normalizing disease, and trying to take some stigma off of disease and some intimidation out of institutional medicine, essentially.
And Matthew, you have graphic medicine projects. So tell us what those are.
Yeah, so you won't see any art from me up here. I did not want to put my sad little doodles up here next to actual, published artists. You can find them on Twitter and everything. They're in some blog posts, but I'm just experimenting with processing, thinking through comics as a literary tool or as a health literacy piece. And so my doodles are kind of like I go to a conference and I sort of sketch note things out, but I'm putting it in the comic frame so I can think about, the gutter can be there for me to have the empty space to think about things and how it flows from one thing to another. But so I accidentally found graphic medicine. When I had started in grad school as a librarian, I was supposed to be finding radiological images for somebody. And it was my first semester as an intern, so I was pretty bad at my job. And I stumbled upon graphicmedicine.org, this website that Ian Williams and MK Serwick had put together. And I kind of just fell in love with the idea, because I am not a childhood comic reader. My fiance introduced me to them really and kind of fell into it. So for the past 5 years, it's been like comic everything. So it latched on really well with thinking about health literacy and the role that the library can play in helping people understand their health information. And so my title is long and obnoxious. I apologize for that. But so on the last slide, the book club kits are the major project that's going on right now. So what I've done is taken medical topics, say addiction, aging, HIV, and created discussion guides to go along with a comic about this subject. The most popular one here in New England so far has been the addiction kit, what with the opioid crisis and that conversation. It's called Sobriety. And so the kits go out to a public library, a medical library, or just anyone in the community really that wants to run a book club. It comes with 6 books. I provide discussion questions to base your conversation on. They're based on a close reading of the text, and I can modify them for people depending on the conversation. And then we also include, consumer health, reliable health information about the topic, because there's a lot of bad information out there, and librarians want the good information out there. So yeah, that's been really successful. We launched them in March, and there have been 26 requests for the kits. There are 10 different topics. I've got flyers if people want them. And then I'm also running, this Week in Graphic Medicine blog, Stranger Things text, because why not? I started with that as a gag, and now it's become like that's what people look for, so I have to stick with it. But so each week, I comb through social media, Google what people send me that they're doing, and create basically it's it's not even annotated. It's a list of links and tweets and everything about comics and medicine going on during that week. And those get pushed out on Fridays. They've been living on my own little personal blog for a while. Now they're on the graphicmedicine.org site. And so it's really been a good way to capture everything that's going on, because as I'm discovering doing a review of medical literature using comics, there's not a lot in the published academic literature about it, but people are using them. People are finding them effective, in practice, talking to people about and processing. And we're not seeing a lot of that published yet. So this is a good way to see what's out there without the help of PubMed.
Okay, that brings up a good question of who do you see as the audience for graphic medicine for your particular projects? And are there different, are they the traditional comics readers? Are they adults or children, or people who would perhaps resist comics at first? Let's start with Matthew and work our way this way.
Okay. So I'm going to base this off of the book club kits. Almost every group that has requested them they're using the kits with non-traditional comic readers. The aging kit in particular went out to a public library, and they did a book discussion group with it. It's a regular reading group that meets anyway, and it was Ross Chast, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? And the feedback I got back was that some people were uncomfortable with it because they don't read comics, but one person fell in love immediately with the medium and started looking for other things, comics, to talk about. And these were people, the stereotypical book club, I suppose. It was, older women reading these comics. And so it was a great way to introduce the medium to them through a subject they were already interested in. But really, I think the audience, what I want to see happen is more educational work in these, get them into clinical settings as a way to educate patients about their conditions, because no one reads those long sheets of information about a medical diagnosis. And medication errors happen all the time because of this. So can we use images to make that better?
So I feel like my audience is a subset of a number of different subsets of audiences. Right now, I'm the artist in residence at the New York Academy of Medicine Historical Collection. So now art or medical history people are starting to be interested, but also because I use a lot of humor. It's like people who are comfortable laughing at the body are the people who I'm really making work for. And I do think that humor as a coping mechanism is underrated, and a lot more people like to use that than maybe willing to admit it. But yeah, so for me, it's some comics readers, some academics interested in the history of medicine. Many of my readers are like in their own medical fields and find the work interesting. And yeah, but again, it's like if you're comfortable laughing at the body or laughing at illness, then I'm for you. So I feel like I'm niche within like a number of different niches. I don't know if that makes it one more niche again or not, but I think that's my audience.
For me, with the Shadra, my thought about it is whatever you need to get from this work, I want you to get. I want you to get whatever you need from this comic. So I've had people come to me and say, I have epilepsy. I really felt something from this work. And I've had people come to me who are like, I don't have epilepsy, but my uncle has epilepsy, my mom has epilepsy, my friend has epilepsy, and this helped me talk to them or like help me understand what they're going through more. And then it kind of goes even wider. I've had people say like, I have anxiety, I have depression, etc., because I cover those things in this work as well. Epilepsy, it's different for everybody, but it can be a package deal. You have epilepsy and you have seizures, but it also comes with anxiety and depression and PTSD. And so there's a lot going on. So my book does go into those things. And I've had people say like, I don't have epilepsy, but I have these things and I can relate to this. So it actually is kind of a lot of people. And I was worried because I was worried that like epilepsy is too hyper-specific. Maybe people wouldn't relate. Maybe people would just kind of pass it up. But it turns out that a lot of people can feel a narrative about like struggling and trying to be functional, and a narrative about just trying to do your best every day to stand up. So for me, the audience is whoever needs this help, whoever can read this and get something from it. That's who I want to read the comic.
Well, my main interest is health education. Educating people about like health and medicine, also the healthcare industry, kind of anything in the healthcare sphere, like what's your doctor thinking, what's the best way to have a relationship with your doctor, all that sort of thing. So I consider my audience the general adult population, and sometimes I do run into kind of pigeonholes where people think, oh, comics, this is great, you can use these to teach children. And I'm like, I don't care about educating children. I want to educate adults. They're the people I know best. I'm interested in adult learning theory and adult education. Plenty of people are doing kids, not my bag. And also then they'll say like, this is great for low literacy readers. Well, that's also true, but why should we prevent people who might enjoy comics from reading them? Like, I would like to have them available and offered to pretty much every adult patient, any adult interested in healthcare. Because like we said, you don't know what people get out of it. So it's a shame when people make an assumption and assume you are not the audience for this, so I won't offer it to you. Mm-hmm.
Just to bounce off, your comics are hilarious, and definitely not for kids. But it's interesting because graphic medicine, kind of as a genre right now, is one of the few areas in comics where almost all of what we have is targeted towards adults or young adult, like older young adult readers already. And that's no reason to stop doing that. They're great and we need more and more. But I'm wondering if maybe some of you might have an idea of why the field has been kind of not touched as much for a younger audience.
Well, actually, I would argue with that a little bit, although I can't remember their name. Remember the Medikids, yeah.
And Booster Shot.
Right,
yeah.
and Booster Shot. So, like, there are...
But they're less volume in the field right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess that's true. I also feel like the people who study graphic medicine are more interested in adult themes.
Yes.
So I think we're also just seeing those because that's what we're looking for. But you're probably right. But I feel like there are some prominent like the booster shot Medikids thing.
No, I don't mean to say that there are none. Just
And there are some in the memoir or novel area. I'm just thinking of it. Raina Telgemeier,
Yeah.
Smile,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Ghosts both have medical or dental conditions behind them.
interestingly, two of the most popular books in a medical school library.
Also, I think that they're happening more in books, published books. Like, we're not seeing them so much classified as comics, as they're probably over in like the health section of the kids section of the bookstore. So they're just maybe not on our radar because they're not flagged comics right here.
I think also part of the reason why you're seeing more of those things geared to young adults or adults is because, like, young adult is kind of the age where you're coming to your identity, and as like you're starting to realize, oh, I'm a person, right? And if you're with illness, I think that's around the time where you start to realize what it is, what it comes with, what you're really going to be dealing with. Not to say that, you know, children don't know, but I think in particular young adult and up is like a very like sensitive time, and that's why I think a lot of these things are geared towards a little bit older readers.
Talking about sensitive times, illness is often a sensitive time. But having a medical condition can be. How do you approach that with sensitivity, with accuracy, with HIPAA compliance, things like that? How do those things affect how you approach graphic medicine?
Does everybody know what HIPAA is? Okay, a lot of nods, right? So there are rules and ethical conditions around how you treat patient information or what you reveal. So just making sure everybody's,
Like I'm not going to make a comic about that guy I saw in the clinic today in the waiting room.
yeah. And for me, I've been working as a massage therapist in oncology for a while, but I feel like those patient narratives are totally like not on my plate because I work with people who have unusual conditions as a result of their cancer treatments. So even to kind of reveal what the condition was would be to like identify them in a certain respect. So I'm totally, everything I talk about, if there's some kind of medical theme, like with the wandering uterus, I'll put it in the context of my life. So I will try to scare my uterus out of my head with something obnoxious smelling. You know, it's like I'm not gonna put someone else there because I don't want them to be identified.
Yeah, it's kind of similar for me. For me, it's a little bit less of a problem as far as like accuracy and HIPAA goes because it's my own experience. So for me, the biggest obstacle as far as like sensitivity goes is feeling comfortable talking about these things because it's already a sensitive thing. It's already, you know, weighs a lot on your mind and your heart, but also I'm just not very good at talking about myself. So, and there's like this level of like vulnerability when you're putting out that much stuff about yourself, in particular about your illness and about everything that comes with it. So for me, it was about like kind of setting up a form of protection and like a wall for me to be able to feel comfortable talking about that. So making art about it and then putting all my experiences into a fictional avatar, but still having it be pretty much me and be very true to life is what helped me kind of, you know, break that down and help me really feel comfortable putting all that stuff out there. So for me, that's the biggest obstacle because I have less of that more technical stuff to worry about. And so when it comes to vulnerability, I think processing that and like figuring out a way for you to put it out there without feeling discomfort is really important.
Also, just in terms of accuracy, you know, in terms of the information we're putting out, my comics are now coming with citations in the back. I used to just put a page in the back that would say, here are some resources for you if you're interested in reading further on this. But because I'm in a medical library, even though it's a historical collection, the last mini comic I made, I actually wrote commentary on each panel in the back to explain some things because it's Galen and Celsus stitching up a gladiator together, you know, so it's like, where did I get the flax idea? Where did I get all this stuff? And then there are also citations. So I'm becoming this weird, like I'm citing panel by panel just to make sure that visually, like everybody gets what's up, and then also in terms of, you know, the images and what's been used.
Hey, Creota, Carla Speed McNeil does that with her fiction comics, Finder, so you're not alone. And it actually it enhances her work.
Yeah, she and I should talk about organizing.
Jumping on the technical thing, though, I actually find I get really, it really kind of triggers my anxiety because I'm so compelled to make sure that it's absolutely as accurate as it can possibly be. And this actually stalls my work sometimes because I will get hung up like, no, I have to look up exactly what that grill looks like in the backyard, because otherwise, it's a bit all or nothing, where it's like, oh no, if they notice one detail is wrong, maybe they can't trust the whole rest of the booklet, so I have to get it right. And also, an example I saw on the internet recently, which made me feel better about the effort I'm putting in, is I saw somebody online comment about art that they saw where a wheelchair was depicted incorrectly. They said, like, no, the wheel would not look like that. That looks more like a hospital wheelchair. That's not one that somebody would use out in the real world. And recently I did a comic about, for Mass General Hospital, Ray goes to the dietitian. The dietitian is a wheelchair user. And I put so much time into looking up exactly how the wheelchair should look and just not even trusting Google searches. I'm like, what if they're just posed? I can't, oh God, I have to go look up like real blogs, and I'm gonna go look up Superstore because I know there's a character on that show that has a wheelchair, blah, blah, blah. But now that I've seen that feedback and know the kind of impact it has on people, like, no, I'm glad I put that effort in. It was a huge pain, and I'm sure I put too much time in, and I need to get more efficient about it. But boy, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it, and it's necessary.
Yeah, I think people, how I put this, don't necessarily understand the value of that kind of representation. And it is very important. And as you continue to draw the representation, you also get the visual vocabulary. So it will be less, anxiety inducing for you to do that accurately. But yeah, that's really important work because that is representation, and it is important for it to be accurate.
Yeah, and there are two levels of information that we're giving out. So there's textual information, but then there's also visual information. So in a lot of my historical stuff, I'll put a note saying, if you're using this for visual reference, good luck to you. But the textual information is correct. Sometimes I just have to pick my battles. But that's the thing that's unique to comics. It's not only are you writing, but you're drawing. And so you have to start to make decisions about what are you drawing and how accurate, how important is it that it be accurate, and then what are you writing and how important is that? And then how do you do it and still keep it engaging, right? Because if it turns educational, even Kathy doesn't make educate, with the, not even Kathy. But it's if you tip it into that realm, then everybody just, their eyes roll up and it gets boring. So
Spinach comics.
Yeah, you have to find a way to do it.
Yeah, that was a thing for me. I'm sorry. Because I'm conveying a lot of abstract information as far as how a seizure feels. And a lot of things that were important to me is to not have that character sit down in front of you and be like, this is what it feels like. Here's a list of, all the emotions I feel, etc. So I really rely on a lot of visuals to convey that abstract information so somebody doesn't feel like they're just being talked at. Yeah, I will break down the information sometimes, but for me, I think it's really important to suture into the narrative via visuals that everyone can understand.
Right,
So I feel that.
It's that show, don't tell.
Exactly, and that's why graphic medicine is so important in healing, and that's something that I believe only comics can do, really.
I guess I got two separate things now. On the HIPAA conversation, it's one that comes up. So I teach a week-long course to third-year medical students, and their main project is to draw their own comic. And they only have that week to do it in. And so we have to spend time talking about the HIPAA compliance because most of them are going to draw something. They're coming right off of a rotation. So they're coming from surgery where they were meeting patients, and they can't include any of that in there. And they also have the fear of, annoying some of their supervisors because they're med students. And there's a long conversation there about how medical students are treated. But this gives them an opportunity to share that treatment in a visual way, and it's not just them, posting online and people interpret it as complaining or anything, but when they draw it out and you can see the terror on this med student's face, and they change their names, they change the residency names and everything, but so they really took a lot of time to make sure that the characters didn't look like themselves and their residents didn't look the same. And, so yeah, it's important at all stages of this. And what was the other thing? Oh, the visual representation. That's one of the things that I really like about the book club kits, because you were talking about abstract. I haven't read this yet. It's on my to-do list today. But it if you've got those huge panels where there's no text at all, and everyone brings something a little different to their reading of a comic. That's part of what makes them great, is you're not being told what to think by the book, what your own experiences are there. So I like to hear how people interpret the images differently, and those conversations between people in a book club can lead to new understanding that they wouldn't have gotten just listening or even reading, and that's something that, as Kathy was saying, or someone was saying, that only comics can do.
Yeah, I think that the graphic medicine opens up a conversation that a lot of comics don't. And like you're saying, there's a lot of interpretation that I think is even more prominent in comics about illness and medicine. And so there's so much discussion, and that's why when anyone comes to me with anything about this comic, I'm like, please tell me. I want to know more, because there's such an important words and thoughts that are surrounding this genre of comics.
Just jumping on that a little bit, one thing I really like about it also is just creating that visual vocabulary and being able to refer back to it in your life. Like, I love that we don't just have the words, we have maybe the image. So somebody might walk away and say like, Mom, I need you to read this book. And now from here on out, we'll be like, it's like that thing, it's like that thing. Like it's like that picture, it's like, I got the ghosts, I got the whatever. It's like that kind of clear mental image. It's not just text.
Yeah, and my hope is that if someone has that in their head, that can be a source of strength or power for them, because it's an identifier and it's not so mysterious to you anymore.
I read a lot of these comics, and I always look for examples of pain depictions. That's something I have to deal with on my own. And, we have this vocabulary of, it feels like my leg is on fire, or there's like someone poured lava on it, and sometimes just putting the abstract, crazy, smear of red and orange and the chaotic images it gets the point across better than saying, oh, there's lava on my leg. Yeah. Well, because literal people take that, and, oh, you're literally going to die.
Yeah. Well, Dumb, Georgia Weber, yep. She did a series called Dumb. It's about her losing her voice, essentially. And so she represents pain as these little stars, like pointy, sharp stars. So she'll be lying in a bed of stars. It's really a powerful image, and it very specifically describes the pain. And pain, for a healthcare provider, the description of the pain helps to tell the provider what is causing the pain in the first place. Because pain due to nerve damage feels different than pain due to muscle damage, or, there are all these different spectrums of this kind of thing. So these visual representations can be really useful also.
I want to highly recommend Dumb to anyone. She was a keynote speaker at this year's Comics and Medicine conference, and it was amazing. So.
You spoke of the importance of representation for people with medical conditions. How well do mainstream American comics do at that, whether it's physical or mental or emotional issues, or surgery? Can Alfred really sew up so many people? Things like that. We'll just get that out of the way.
It's bad.
It's bad.
Can I share? So I have to share this. One of my favorite. I love the EC horror comics. And I really love looking at them for representations of medicine and health. And there's one story that is really great. It's great. It's about a man in a small town who develops cancer. And the small town doctor tells him he has cancer, and he refuses treatment. And the cancer starts on his arm, and it very slowly consumes his entire body. And dogs start to disappear, and people start to disappear, and the guy turns into this cancer monster. He can't be killed. He's herded. They're shooting guns at him. They herd him into a cave, and then they collapse the cave in front. Because you can't kill cancer, you can only hope to control it. And so, I think this is actually a fascinating indication. A lot of these narratives that we read in popular formats, they're not giving you accurate information, but they're really giving you an interesting sense of what we think of a disease. And so those narratives are really important. and sometimes are really entertaining at the same time. But at that, in the 50s, it's essentially true. Like if you had a cancer diagnosis, odds were very likely that you were going to die. So cancer could not be killed. It was going to consume you, and it was going to consume those around you with your caregiving, right? The best you could do was contain it in a cave with shotguns. But, the story really speaks to the horror of cancer at the time. And I find those types of narratives very powerful and very interesting. So
I think that in mainstream media in particular, people with illness are very demonized. They're very misunderstood. They're often made into villains, especially people who have mental illness. Like their villain motivation, they'll just throw out, oh, they have blank, and that's why. And I think that's really upsetting. And we need more positive or more just realistic depictions of illness and just stop stigmatizing it so much. And I really believe in the idea of own voices. And so I think that there should be more representation of people with illness telling their stories or writing characters with illness so those things can become more realistic and be like, hey, we are people just like you, and we're not villains in a story, and just depicting us that way is really upsetting, and I think that should change.
It feels like sometimes they take a step forward and then they take 2 steps back. Thinking of people with illness or people with very disabilities or something being marked in pop culture. I was so psyched to see Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road. Oh man, this is great. She's an amputee of some kind, congenital or acquired. Oh, she's great. She's wonderful. She's an awesome hero. And now we're coming back to Wonder Woman, where one of the baddies has, an injured face. And I think upcoming Black Panther, I think Ulysses Klaue is missing part of his arm. He's a villain again. So it's back to the baddies are the ones who are marked. And, that's frustrating. And then there's just the sloppiness, which annoys me. And now that I have more friends who work in hero comics, and I know kind of how the sausage is made, wow, they're given no time to get things done. It seems very slapdash. So that probably explains why I remember a cover of Birds of Prey where Black Canary has a broken leg and she's got a cast on, and her fishnet stockings go right down into the cast. I'm the cast. You're not. It's are you not even trying, or do you just not have the time? And it's just I don't think they realize the permanence of this stuff. For so long, it's been a just disposable pop culture, but now it's more collected and it sticks around.
Sorry. So it's not a specific instance, but sometimes the entire nature of, so how many of the major heroes we all know and maybe love are kids of trauma? And trauma is the driving factor for superherodom. And what message are we sending to everyone that, okay, these guys had a traumatic childhood and look at what they've become. Should we be, I worry about what message we're sending everyone if that's how you become a hero.
I think we're starting kind of to reach the point. It's very slow, but even just the idea of having this panel and discussing it, we're reaching the point where people are starting to realize that that's not okay. And I think if we keep this positive momentum, that we can eventually change that.
Well, I think it'll also be interesting to watch with greater prevalence of personal narratives of illness. Watch for the sync up between third-person representations of that, and see how they start to, or if they do start to skew towards the more personalized, when they start to get it right, when they start to take things into account, because these narratives are influencing public opinion. And that's what really interests me about graphic medicine, trying to normalize the body, make everybody, before they become a patient, I want people to be ready for it in a way. And I think these types of books, narratives, personal narratives of illness, can really help people understand that odds are good that they will be a patient. Odds are really good. Because they're also going to die, right? We know that, right? We're all going to die. Well, you guys are going to die. I'm not going to die. But I think we should all get comfortable with that. So it's but not even to that drastic degree, but I'm using that because it's hard for me to convince people that they may get ill. I may not be able to convince people that they will die, but they have to acknowledge it, right? So I'm using that as an extreme example, but I think that it's important for everybody to understand that, there should not be blame, and it is a crapshoot, and you may be a vegetarian who's getting 8 hours of sleep a night underneath a pyramid, and you still can end up with breast cancer. Like, that's how these things work. So I think that work like this also really helps to make it more, more normalizing and more accepting, and that's why, anyway. Sorry, soapbox, I'm done.
No, but you know what's a positive example? You know who's doing a great job that I shill for her every time I get a microphone in front of my face is the Oh Joy sex toy webcomic. Oh my God, it's wonderful. Admittedly, it is sex toy reviews and a lot of sex education, but the just vast array of people that she depicts, and it's not because it's a very special episode. It's like people using wheelchairs, people using crutches, all kinds of gender representation, all kinds of weight, everything. It's wonderful, and it's just because she needs kind of a narrator placeholder to talk to.
Well, also she has people guessed. So she is not telling the story of that person in the wheelchair. A friend of mine once asked her to do a comic about sex after pelvic radiation from ovarian cancer. And so there's going to be a collaborative work there because Erica is not, she's like, we can't do that because we are not that. But so that's also like really exciting about her because she is very understanding of the voice. Yeah, so.
Can you talk more about collaborations, if you've worked in the field, collaborations either with people who have the conditions you're writing about or with experts? Do you interview people to do research when you're trying to do something that's more on the more educational side? Or Kathy, are you commissioned to do comics? Does MGH come and say, we want you to do a comic on this, and then how does that work?
Yes, I have done projects for Mass General in that format. I've done wellness comics around diabetes for essentially their diabetes center, and it's a matter of talking with them. What's the content they want turned into a comic? How are we going to come up, make this a narrative? Lots and lots of back and forth and kind of processing, making sure that nurses review it and make sure it's medically accurate, making sure that it's approved from on high. It definitely needs to fit the Mass General brand, among other things. So it's, it can be a challenge, but I really like it because I find that, I'm sure a lot of creative people have said this, is when you have those boundaries to kind of go up against, that's where that really forces you to be creative and think creatively. So like in these comics, I'm not going to sit and make jokes about dicks and sex. So how do I make the comic engaging and still kind of fun without the obvious solution?
Yeah, that's hard.
Anyway. For me, because my work is so personal, I haven't really consulted people because it's about my own experience. But on the flip side, I'm hoping that this debut will kind of open people up to asking me questions or consultation. I'm always very open to talk about my experience. If anyone needs help writing epileptic characters or whatever, anything like that, I would like to have that discussion. So I'm always very open to that.
Yeah, I've never done that kind of interview either. I do medical illustration sometimes just for a surgeon who happened to do my hip, actually. But, even that kind of thing is very involved, because, yeah. So that's kind of set me off.
So the comics are your relief from...
Comics are my relief from, trying to make sure I get that retractor looking just right, or, knowing what brand of Bovie this person likes, or, oh, no, the osteotomy is, too far to the left. It's okay, fine. So, yeah, so I've kind of shied away from other more in-depth things.
And Matthew, what guides your choices of, for instance, the book club things? Are you being told, or are you looking up to find out what is the most in-demand topics, or are the insurance companies coming to you?
I'm going to avoid that one because I have a long rant about privatized health comics. So the book club kits, the topics were kind of a mix. I picked things that I knew for sure people would have it, that there's a demand for and an interest in having conversations about. And some are ones that I thought needed to be conversations that I hadn't seen yet. I will openly admit my biggest regret is actually our epilepsy kit that no one has requested yet. It's David B's Epileptic, and there's been a lot of pushback and questions about that one. So I'm kind of hoping to read this and see if it can be a substitute so we can get it out and have those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me about David B's work, and I have read Epileptic. I think it's an important work, but I do think that we need more representation from the inside, and more representation of someone who is telling from their own experience. I appreciate his work, and I'm glad it's there, but like that, I get asked about that a lot, and I'm like, we need a bit more of like personal experience.
It's also one that I worry people aren't requesting because it's not an easy one if you're not a comic reader as a whole. It's a long, dense comic. So that's kind of a guiding choice for a lot of these books as well. At the time, there's some of these topics there aren't many things out there on. Addiction, finding one that doesn't glorify addiction at all is proven very difficult. There are a few questionable moments in sobriety, the one we've chosen, but it was the best of the options. And I think it does a good job of starting the conversation.
I also think that sometimes having those like those other opinions in the books are also like good for just provoking conversation, and to a certain extent also necessary. I mean, addiction has a number of different facets, and that is,
That's a question I get a lot with that kit because I'm finding high schools requesting it.
Oh, sure.
And they have to be very careful, which is understandable.
I want to ask the audience, give you a chance to ask questions about comics and medicine, or talk about comics that discuss medicine that you enjoy. So anyone want to offer a question or comment? Yes, over here.
So you talked a little bit about making it engaging, and especially when you're doing education, it tends to be so dry because you're trying to communicate a lot of terminology and all of that sort of stuff. So less on the illustrative side and more on the writing side, how do you make it accessible to people? How do you simplify the terms so that people can really get into it and understand it?
I'm going to repeat the question so it gets into the recording. How do you make comics that are medical comics that are supposed to be educational, engaging, especially on the writing side?
Well, so with my work, it's like it's supposed to be educational, but I don't tell people, right? But what I do is I act like they already know it. So, it's like I write it in, and my attitude as a writer is that everybody already knows what this stuff is. And then I have referenced later so that people can actually go, like, find out what an osteotomy is, or, like whatever it is, and go, that's not too far to the left. I don't know. I should write a comic about that. But I have the opinion as a writer that you already know what I'm talking about. And isn't that funny? And then I'm hoping the person's like, oh yeah, that's really funny. Oh, and now that I'm at the end of the book, I can actually figure out why it's funny. So I'm trying not to tell someone what they need to know, but I'm like, this, right? So, but no one's hiring me to write educational material either.
For me, it's framing it into a narrative more like, and having other points of reference, not just the educational terms and things like that, but like I said, like visuals and characters and other things to kind of thread it into a tapestry. And that way, even if one individual component fails to connect with whoever's reading it, there's still another way for them to kind of latch on, and that way they can kind of get the whole picture and they can still process those things, even if they don't necessarily get interested in the terminology itself.
One way I find of making things engaging is just to make sure that emotion is depicted. Some of the, I think, unsuccessful medical comics I've read are just boring because people are just sitting at a desk like, doctor, I have this. What is my problem? And like, well, here's the, just like, oh God, who cares? This is just so flat and boring. So I just love it when at least, even if it's a bit exaggerated, you're just like, oh, why is this happening to me? I'm so frustrated. Oh, I'm so sad. At least then, you can kind of project onto it. You're like, oh, I know what it's like to feel those emotions. So at least that kind of pings you there. And just kind of trying to get creative about the storytelling and just trying to think beyond the easy first step. So it might be, okay, it's a narrative about somebody who's losing weight. So he runs a race. Hey, like, okay, what else could he do besides running a race? Like, what other activities could he go LARPing? Could he go, does he want to try out for the Celtics? Like, what's something really just what's not first draft quality? Essentially, is the way I'm thinking about it.
I think a lot of educational stuff will start with something like, what's going on? Well, I have an allergy. It's a type 1 hypersensitivity response where I'm like, and it's like I get urticaria, which means hives, and then you're just like, stop. So when action stops to like catch you up, that's when it just kills you. And, that's the main, like getting around that is like the challenge. And there are a number of different ways to do it, but you have to find your way. So.
One thing that I'm intrigued about, and I don't know, it's something I want to explore, I don't know the possibilities, is I'm really interested in the idea of kind of pursuing more fantastic stories from medical things. Like, could I write a story about, this is the one I'm playing with, but like a hitman who has Crohn's disease. Like, what's his life like? Right? And like, how can I interweave like showing what his life is like and what planning he has to do? But he's a hitman. That's much more interesting than just some dude next door who wants to run a race. Like, who cares? Like, could they be jewel thieves? Could they be pirates? Like, what could they be while still depicting, like, and they have hepatitis C and they want to get that new medication where you can cure it. Like, interweaving that. But I don't know if people will identify it. It might make it engaging, but it might make it hard to internalize. So I'm curious about the potential, but I think it needs exploration. And I hope somebody goes there someday. Maybe that's me.
Sounds awesome.
From like a reader and book recommendation standpoint, I guess that kind of gets at the why. Why do I care? Is what I want the first question to be, and I think that leads back to the collaboration piece. When the comic is driven entirely from the medical side, the characterization and the why do I care question gets missed. So I almost wonder if we need you guys to go to the physicians rather than the other way around to see, because that's what's going to get people engaged in the first place. Otherwise, you may as well just hand them the sheet of paper again.
And you always have to remember, we're competing against things like, I could read this or I could go watch Game of Thrones.
Yes,
yeah. How do you compete with that? It's the attention economy, completely.
Any other questions? Yes, Dave.
I just stepped out, so I apologize if this question has already been addressed. You can say addressed and I'll go away. Taking one more direction on this, how do you think fictional medicine could be used? And I'm coming at this from having done a class on comic books and cancer. Plenty of cancer narratives and autobiographies out there, but the one that proved the most successful and hooked into the class was the death of Captain Marvel. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, as both practitioners and as creators, is there a space in comics and medicine for using the fictional for real-life medical education and purposes?
So can graphic fiction do things about medicine that graphic nonfiction cannot?
Yeah.
Well, graphic fiction certainly helps us get, it's an easier transition beyond HIPAA, right? So if you're writing from experience and the experience is too unique, then that's still an identifier. But taking it into fiction, really does help you like get a certain amount beyond HIPAA. So already that like frees you up to write a more interesting, or maybe, well, it frees you up to write something that's easier for you to write and can still be very compelling. So.
And I'm sure that maybe Matthew can talk about this some more, but I love that in essentially the graphic medicine sphere, I see this a lot at the comics and medicine conferences. There's people who are really into media studies, and they'll do things like they'll analyze Luke Cage and compare it to the history of like African Americans and medicine in the United States. So it's like they'll use those fictional stories maybe as a starting point for conversation or for analysis. And so I love that we don't have to create everything from scratch. There is the engaging stuff that people know about, like talking about Iron Man and he has PTSD in the third movie. Let's use that as a springboard. Like that stuff exists and people can relate to it and it's analyzed.
Yes, ma'am.
No.
A lot of talking about patient education, but I was wondering, do any of you have experience in medical education? So using graphic work to educate either medical students or continuing education for doctors. There's a lot of continuing ed is around team communications and how to communicate imbalances in team dynamics that it's not very engaging if you just do it in text.
So the potential of graphic medicine for training and educating and re-educating medical professionals.
There are a number of medical programs around the country that do have like comic graphic medicine classes and workshops for med students. And Ben Schwartz is a New Yorker cartoonist. He's also a doctor, and he teaches at Columbia in their
narrative.
Yeah, he's a part of their narrative medicine program. So there is a movement toward this. It's not, in every medical school in the country. And you were talking about.
Yeah, so mine's our students have a choice. They get 3 of these flexible clinical experience classes in their third year, and they're week long. Most of the students pick something like along their specialty area, more time to focus on that. But I offer a course on health literacy and comics, where we talk about how comics might be used to communicate differently, and then they create their own comic. So we read and analyze 3 comics throughout the week. Last time I picked them, I think in the future I'm going to ask the students what they want to read, because then they'll be more engaged with it. But it's definitely a growing thing, and it's more common. There aren't a ton of medical schools that have a specific humanities program, but those that do are embracing comics as part of that. They're mostly looking at it as the clinical expectations for the students or teaching expectations have been focused around preventing burnout and encouraging empathy throughout medical school, because we see a lot of studies saying that by the third year, students start losing the ability to empathize with patients because they're looking at everything mechanistically. And so you kind of have to ensure that doesn't fall away or retrain it. So I think there's more to be done there.
Okay, we are nearly out of time, so I want to give everybody a chance to do an elevator pitch for what you're working on now or next, starting with Kathy.
I have a brand new comic, fresh this morning. It's a tiny mini comic called Brain, Why You Gotta? And it's about cognitive distortions. If you're familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's ways that you think in a weird way that affect your mood. So it's a little mini comic just kind of illustrating a bunch of those. Come on by my table. I'm at DO3, right over by the entrance. Purple tablecloth.
This one just came out, so I do have a couple of things. Nothing with a title yet, but next year, 2018, I'm working on 2 projects, both a game and a webcomic about processing trauma in 2 different contexts, and also a 3rd comic, short one, about gender narrative in Islam. Oh, also, I'm at table B80.
And I am right next door at B81. And I'm, like I said, I'm the artist in residence at the Academy of Medicine Historical Collection. I'm researching the history of sutures and ligatures because I'm also a textile fiber person. That is my brain as a needlepoint up there, so I'm really into that. Anyway, so I have my new mice offerings are a small mini comic about Galen and Celsus, who did not live in the same century, stitching up a gladiator together, right? With all the citations in the back. I also teach I've been teaching a workshop at the Academy called Embroidering Medicine, and we talk about the difference between like decorative sewing and functional sewing, and I talk about the history of stitches. So I wrote a mini comic called Embroidery Lab. It has images from the library in the back as embroidery patterns. Like, it's very niche, but you know, it's like if you're into that, I've got that too. And then I still have the mini comics of injury prevention for cartoonists and drawers, because the book isn't coming out until April. So if you're interested in those, I have those as well.
As you can see, I don't have a table number. But if you want to find me, Twitter is the best way. I'm always on there, excessively. Really, I'm looking at figuring out how to expand the book club kit program, evaluating where it's at, where it should go, trying to build partnerships with people, both in New England and without. And I'm really looking at, I've had this project burning in the back of my mind since two major musical artists for me committed suicide this year. So I'm looking at representations of suicide in comics. So if anyone knows about any, you should send them my way. I've got a huge list that I'm working on. I want to do a reading of that because the way we represent that is important and usually pretty poor.
Okay, well, thank you very much for Matthew, Creota, Yasmin, and Kathy.